Now, there's a name I'm going to use quite often in this sermon, and I got to make sure I don't talk fast, because if I mispronounce it, there'll be a hearing with the SPPRC. My grandmother was, when we were going, talking to Grandma later in life, and when we were going through some of Grandma's things after she passed, my father's mother, Dad talked about some of the groups she was in, and she was a Pythian sister. Now, some of you may know someone who was a Pythian sister. I know Forrest had, I don't know if lodge is the right word, but had a branch. And there were several women in town I've talked to who were involved back in the day. But the Pythian Sisters and another organization that's kind of similar to the Knights of Pythias were fraternal orders. And we still have fraternal orders and lodges and things. But they were fraternal orders, and they were named after a Greco-Roman legend. And I'd like to share that story, that tale with you this morning. And that is the story of Damon and Pythias. The city of Syracuse in Sicily was ruled by a man who was harsh and mean. This tyrant, whose name was Dionysius, had seized power by force and kept his authority by exercising the greatest severity. He was always surrounded by guards, who at a mere sign from him were ready to put anyone to death. Dionysius was therefore feared and hated by the people whom he governed, but who would have been very glad to get rid of him? No honest man cared to come near such a bloodthirsty wretch, and there were soon none but wicked men to be found in his court. There lived in those days in Syracuse 2 young men, called Damon and Pythias. They were very good friends, and loved each other so dearly that they were hardly ever seen apart. Now it happened that Pythias in some way roused the anger of the tyrant, who put him in prison and condemned him to die in a few days. When Damon heard of it, he was in despair, and vainly tried to obtain his friend's pardon and release. The mother of Pythias was very old and lived far away from Syracuse with her daughter. When the young man heard that he was to die, he was tormented by the thought of leaving the women alone. In an interview with his friend Damon, Pythias regretfully said that he would die easier had he only been able to bid his mother goodbye and find a protector for his sister. Damon, anxious to gratify his friend's last wish, went into the presence of the tyrant and proposed to take the place of Pythias in prison, and even face execution, if need be, provided the latter were allowed to visit his relatives once more. Dionysius had heard of the young men's touching friendship and hated them both merely because they were good. Yet he allowed them to change places, warning them both, however, that if Pythias were not back in time, Damon would have to die in his stead. At first, Pythias refused to allow his friend to take his place in prison, but finally he consented, promising to be back in a few days to release him. So, Pythias hastened home, found a husband for his sister, and saw her safely married. Then, after providing for his mother and bidding her farewell, he set out to return to Syracuse. The young man was traveling alone and on foot. He soon fell into the hands of thieves, who bound him fast to a tree. And it was only after hours of desperate struggling that he managed to wrench himself free once more and sped along his way. He was running as hard as he could to make up for lost time when he came to the edge of a stream. He had crossed it easily a few days before, but a sudden spring rain had changed it into a raging torrent, which no one else would have ventured to enter. In spite of the danger, Pythias plunged into the water, and nerved by the fear that his friend would die in his stead, he fought the waves so successfully that he reached the other side safe, but almost exhausted. Regardless of his pains, Pythias pressed anxiously onward, although his road now lay across a plain where the hot rays of the sun and the burning sands greatly increased his fatigue and faintness, and almost made him die of thirst. Still, he sped onward as fast as his trembling limbs could carry him, for the sun was sinking fast, and he knew that his friend would die if he were not in Syracuse by sunset. Dionysius, in the meanwhile, had been amusing himself by taunting Damon, constantly telling him that he was a fool to have risked his life for a friend, however dear. To anger him, he also insisted that Pythias was only too glad to escape death and would be very careful not to return in time. Damon, who knew the goodness and affection of his friend, received these remarks with the scorn they deserved, and repeated again and again that he knew Pythias would never break his word, but would be back in time unless hindered by some unforeseen way. The last hour came. The guards led Damon to the place of execution, where he again asserted his faith in his friend, adding, however, that he sincerely hoped Pythias would come too late, so that he might die in his stead. Just as the guards were about to put Damon to the sword, Pythias dashed up, pale, blood-stained and disheveled, and flung his arms around his friend's neck with a sob of relief. For the first time, Damon now turned pale and began to shed tears of bitter regret. In a few hurried, panting words, Pythias explained the cause of his delay, and loosing his friend's bonds with his own hands, bade the guards bind him instead. Dionysius, who had come to see the execution, was so touched by this true friendship that for once he forgot his cruelty and let both young men go free, saying that he would not have believed such devotion possible had he not seen it with his own eyes. This friendship, which wrung tears from the grim executioners and touched the tyrant's heart, has become proverbial. When men are devoted friends, they are often compared to Damon and Pythias, whose story to this day has been a favorite with poets and playwrights. The last hour came. The guards led Damon to the place of execution, where he again asserted his faith in his friend, adding, however, that he sincerely hoped Pythias would come too late, so that he might die in his stead. What bond of love, brotherhood, and fellowship could be stronger than the example we see in this tale? Some people would never so much as inconvenience themselves to help someone, let alone put their life on the line for another person. Not to mention the trust that a friend will not leave you to be punished on their behalf. And the macabre hope Damon has that the friend will be late so that they will not have to suffer. The last hour came. The guards led Damon to the place of execution, where he again asserted his faith in his friend, adding, however, that he sincerely hoped Pythias would come too late, so that he might die in his stead. This story, dear friends, should touch each of our hearts, because you see, in a way, in a strange way, we have all experienced these events ourselves. We have, each of us, played the part of Pythias, except we didn't make it back in time. Some of us failed to untie ourselves from the bonds the thieves tied us with, trapped fast in the bindings, bound by greed, love of wealth, envy, and a fixation on material things. Some of us failed to swim through the raging water, finding ourselves swept downstream, overcome by our doubts and misgivings, our anxieties, pushed aside by our insecurities, unable to fight through our inadequacies. Some of us failed to cross the hot and sandy plain, brought to utter exhaustion and collapse, burned by the heat of our own passion and rage, thirsting for clean water, but drinking from poisoned wells and polluted springs, sometimes even drinking knowingly from those sources. And even those of us who were there at the time could not stop the execution. You see, unlike Pythias, we could not loose the prisoner who stood in our place. And you see, unlike Damon, who longed to take death in place of his friend, Christ got his wish. The last hour came. The guards led him to the place of execution, where he again asserted his faith in his friends, adding, however, that he sincerely hoped that he might die in their stead. for all our faults, for all of our shortcomings and our failings. He saw opportunities for something better. Christ saw what we could do, what we could build, what we could become. And hoping that his trust in us would not be misplaced, he paid a debt for our sakes. Trusting that we would carry on the mission, that we would carry on the example. Not because he had to, because he wanted to. Because he loved us, and love makes one do astounding things. You see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. We have, as I said, all played the role of Pythias, but not as well as Pythias himself. Perhaps armed with the knowledge of the love and hope and trust that went into Christ's sacrifice for us, we might try and emulate both characters from the myth, having the determination to do right by those who suffer on our behalf, having the care to appreciate those who try and share our burdens, having the compassion to reach out and help others who are burdened and bound, finding ways to bring them relief and support. What a wondrous future we could make if we strove to be people connected by deep love and fellowship, eager to emulate the one who bought our pardon and freedom. The brotherly love and fellowship between Damon and Pythias could turn and touch the heart of the tyrant. What could Christ-like love and fellowship do for us? What hearts could we unlock if we fed our Christ-like love and our fellowship, if we strengthened it, going forward together to do amazing things? As we celebrate the outpouring of love that comes from the Lord, let us rise in body or spirit as we sing our final hymn. Come thou fount of every blessing. Number 400 in your hymn.